Undead, undead, undead. Come here, one more back for Requiem. I'm hopefully this time. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm really well. Get that out here.
Today is Dracula by the Irish author Bram Stoker, published in 1897. This is actually my first time reading the novel, which is hard to believe, for me, because it's a major Gothic literature classic. This Barnes & Noble edition contains illustrations by the one and only Edward Gorey. Not very many, though, sadly. The edition isn't really illustrated by so much as decorated by Edward Gorey. There really aren't many illustrations. I've linked the Penguin edition below as well. If you purchase the book using the Amazon links below, the show gets a kickback and it helps support this project, and I really appreciate it. Thanks a bunch. A very helpful source for this review is the highly informative BBC documentary on Dracula from the series Nightmare: The Birth of Horror, linked below. With all its film adaptations, everybody knows the story of Dracula, or at least a version. It wasn't the first vampire story, but it's easily the most well-known. It was preceded by the novella Carmilla by Joseph Sheridan Le Fanu, as well as the first modern vampire tale, a short story entitled The Vampire, with a Y, by John William Polidori, a doctor who developed the story from an unfinished piece of a story written by his patient, the poet Lord Byron. The real-life story behind that short story, The Vampire, is truly dark, and this month I'll be doing a Patron-Only review of that one on Patreon. Link below if you'd like to sign up and check it out. Thanks a bunch. Interestingly, Stoker worked as a theater critic for the Dublin Evening Mail, which at one time was co-owned by Joseph Sheridan Le Fanu, the author of Carmilla. I'm not 100% sure Stoker was directly inspired by Carmilla, but it seems very likely. Carmilla was partially inspired by the story of Elizabeth Bathory, the Hungarian countess who allegedly bathed in the blood of young women as a means to stay young and beautiful. A lot of young women. Look at that. Yeah, Bathory. Bath. I can't believe this is the first time I've ever thought of that. That is crazy, man. That's crazy. God. Like 20 years I've known about that story, never put that pun together. Shit. Dracula was inspired by the Romanian warlord Vlad III, aka Vlad Tepes, aka Vlad the Impaler. Guess what he did to his enemies? Vlad Tepes is also the name of an astoundingly good French black metal band. Drink the Poetry of the Celtic Disciple is a true black metal cult classic. I highly recommend it. This edition begins with an interesting short story by Stoker entitled Dracula's Guest, which is not included in all editions, and was actually first published posthumously in 1914. It tells the story of a man who finds himself in an accursed rural cemetery outside of Munich on Walpurgisnacht. It's a nice appetizer. It's actually more unsettling than the rest of the book in my opinion, so I'm glad they included it. Dracula is an epistolary novel told in a series of diary entries and letters written by or related to the main characters, who collectively serve as the novel's protagonist. Not only is it a multicultural folkloric tale of horror, but it's also an adventure story, sometimes told in the form of a travel journal. It's an innovative book, both in content and style. It tells the story of an Englishman named Jonathan Harker, who travels to Transylvania to work out the purchase of a property in London by an obscure Romanian aristocrat named Gary Oldman, Count Dracula. I love it in the film when Keanu Reeves arrives to the castle in the 1992 Coppola version. And the hooded coachman, the obscured coachman, has a big claw and he just pulls Keanu in the carriage and Keanu's just like... It's the most stiff performance I've ever seen. I love him for that. Little does Jonathan realize what he's getting into when he sets off on his journey. It turns into a surreal nightmare. Dracula imprisons him in his castle and reveals what he is. An ancient vampire with a voracious bloodlust, yearning to feast on the unsuspecting denizens of jolly old England. So a portion of the novel is like a prison diary, which is very interesting. The book is quite the amalgamation. Eventually escaping, Jonathan is aided by his wife Mina and his friends, Arthur Homewood, the eccentric Professor Van Helsing, a kind of Sam Elliott-style Texan named Quincy Morris, and Van Helsing's former student Dr. John Seward, who runs an asylum that houses a very curious lunatic, Mr. Renfield, who has some sort of psychic connection to Dracula and who also enjoys eating living things such as flies and spiders. Dr. Seward describes him as a zoophagus. Another significant character is Mina's friend Lucy Westenra, and y'all know what happens to her. So the friends join forces to rid the world of this ancient nightmare. Indeed, Dracula was allegedly born out of a nightmare that Stoker had about what would become the three vampiric sisters who inhabit Castle Dracula. It's rumored that it came from some crab Stoker ate. Shellfish food poisoning might have changed literary horror history forever. Silver lining on that one, huh? Nature has an enormous presence in Dracula. Stoker writes with a naturalist sensibility with many descriptions of geography, trees, the sun, the sea, and weather patterns, all utilized to evoke a foreboding atmosphere. No pun intended. For Stoker, it seems that nature is violent, often dark, inexplicable, capricious, and immortally powerful. The same qualities describe his notorious villain. It's as if Stoker is suggesting that Dracula himself is a force of nature, and since he represents death immortal, that's not going too far. Dracula is death. Everlasting, immortal death, and death is very much a part of nature, the most difficult problem for us to deal with. How do we face death? That is, how do we face nature? Historically, in the West, with Christianity. I don't mean to sound like a broken record talking about Camille Paglia and her book Sexual Persona all the time, but since I'm reading it at the moment, it's impossible for me not to read Dracula through her lens, as she discusses the battle of Christianity against what she calls pagan nature in that book, as well as vampires. So this whole idea of nature in Dracula was inspired by Camille Paglia and her book Sexual Personae. So to use Paglia's term, Dracula is the ancient story of Christianity warring with pagan nature. You can see it in the following line from Van Helsing in the book, during his breakdown when he's trying to save Lucy after she's been bitten by Dracula. This is from the book. Then he raised his arms again, as though appealing to the whole universe. "God, God, God," he said. "What have we done? What has this poor thing done that we are so sore beset? Is there fate amongst us still, sent down from the pagan world of old, that such things must be and in such a way?" The pagan world of old, right? I can't do the Van Helsing Dutch accent. "What has this poor thing done that we are so sore beset?" The Victorian melodrama has turned to 11 in Dracula, so heads up. To a certain degree, Dracula is able to control the elements and the weather, as well as animals. He can turn into one at will, most famously, of course, a bat. He can't control everything, just tempestuous weather and dark, nocturnal animals. He embodies the cruel elements of nature and the cruel elements of mortality and evil, which we have yet to contend with and perhaps never will entirely. And this element of pagan nature seems very intentional on Stoker's part. For example, the Russian boat that sails into Whitby carrying Dracula, driven by a dead captain, is named the Demeter. Demeter was the Greek goddess of agriculture and was a prominent figure in pagan Greek mystery cult rituals. So, this seems very intentional. Dracula is also about the war between reason and madness. The enlightened Professor Van Helsing serves God, and the insane mental patient Renfield serves the Lord of Flies, personified by Dracula. There's not a great deal of ambiguity in Stoker. His views are clearly delineated, not only in the realm of religion and morality, but also between the genders, rigidly, which comes across as near ridiculous in its Victorian Puritanism by modern standards. But what is ambiguous, and the most interesting part of the novel, is the gray area between the natural and the supernatural, between science and superstition, between life and death. It's a tale of the limits of man's reason when confronted with the dark unknown. What if the devil walked the earth? In Romanian, Dracula means the devil, and in the book, one of the Count's pseudonyms is Count de Ville. Clever. In a way, it's not dissimilar from the narrative of Jaws, a confrontation with the unrelenting force of voracious nature. It must be the oldest story in history. The good characters seem to be symbols of virtue. Mina is moral purity, Jonathan is bravery, Arthur, Seward, and Quincy are loyalty, and Professor Van Helsing is reason. On the other side, Renfield is madness and Dracula is pure evil. The book is a strange, displaced, and twisted eroticism found within the quintessential fluid exchange, the result of which, in the book's most transgressive and hotly debated scene, when the Count violently forces Mina to drink his blood, causes her to become, to quote Mina, unclean. Her purity, both religious and physical, is contaminated.
And she will become one herself.
It's clearly an assault, and yet earlier in the scene, recalling when Dracula is about to feed on her, Mina says, in the book, "I was bewildered, and strangely enough, I did not want to hinder him." Mina suggests that it's due to Dracula's spell, but Coppola and others went so far as to create a love story between the Count and Mina in their film adaptations, something that's completely absent in the novel. The erotic displacement in Dracula recalls the sinful sexual impurity that Victorian morality wanted to stifle. Dracula likens eroticism to disease. Understandable for the era given the horrific consequences of, syphilis. Violent eroticism in Dracula is firmly in the realm of death and degeneration, and yet those are easily the most imaginative scenes in the book, the moments that have the most blood, literally, like when Lucy receives the blood of several male characters to sustain her life. Also notice how the word heart appears many times throughout the novel. We're never far from the theme of blood. Stoker is at his worst when he's trying to be virtuous. The book is psychological repression in novel form. It's like he's fighting to restrain himself the entire time. Like Renfield. Master! There's a great deal of pious, saccharine sentimentality in the relationships between the characters. It's as if Stoker realized how dull the good guys are and had to remind himself, and unfortunately us, of their saintly qualities through blunt force repetition. At the same time, as it's the story of Christianity versus pagan nature, it's to be expected, and contributes to the atmosphere, but it's a novel bloated with righteous idealism between fleeting moments of creative depravity. It has some of the driest, glaringly awkward affectation I have ever read in a novel. You come away feeling like you've attended a Protestant sermon. And Stoker does not stick the landing. The ending is miserably bad. Non-existent. There's barely an ending. Any film adaptation is better. For such a lengthy build-up, there's no payoff. It's like,
you had so much potential.
But here's the thing. Because of all this, the repression, the piety, the dull moralism, Stoker, perhaps unintentionally, did something very interesting. He succeeded in making the evil in the novel vastly more compelling than the good. Dracula's history as a warrior, his mysterious transformation, his isolation and incredible intelligence, his supernatural powers, his bloodlust. This is why the vampires lasted as an enormously popular archetype. There's so much depth to explore. And my wife made a great point. These humans are fighting for Christian values, for eternal life. Vampires already have eternal life. The men and women are only hoping for it if it exists. Dracula already found it, and is offering it, like Jesus. Drink his blood and live forever, right? And in the book, Renfield alludes to this when he explains his reason for eating living things. As Renfield says in the book, I used to fancy that life was a positive and perpetual entity, and that by consuming a multitude of live things, no matter how low in the scale of creation, one might indefinitely prolong life. At times I held the belief so strongly that I actually tried to take human life. The doctor here will bear me out that on one occasion I tried to kill him for the purpose of strengthening my vital powers by the assimilation with my own body of his life through the medium of his blood. Relying, of course, upon the scriptural phrase, for the blood is the life. Here, Stoker is alluding to the Eucharist, immortality through sacred cannibalism. It's an old idea. The vampire literalizes the symbolism of Christianity. But of course, immortal or not, it's also a curse, and the vampires are not sympathetic. Not at all. Stoker doesn't romanticize the vampire. They feed primarily on the young and weak, just like other predators, the darkest parts of nature. They're parasites. Dracula is well and truly evil. They're animals with absolutely no moral code whatsoever. Only a single overwhelming hunger that must be met by any means necessary. Pagan nature, no? Stoker implies that the major difference between humans and vampires, which is to say between humans and animals, is self-sacrifice versus selfishness. But then perhaps these are just two variants of a species in competition for eternal life, each out to destroy the other. Although in a way, to play devil's advocate, the vampires sometimes let the humans live, eternally. Not all of them, though. It's not really addressed. The law of the vampires isn't revealed. I don't know if they have one. So what I think overall? Much of Dracula was dull and no less than 50% of it could have been cut. Van Helsing's broken English, while initially charming, when lengthened into pages, became astoundingly tedious to follow. For me. I mean, I was dying, man. It's like having the blood sucked out of me, right? He's funny, but I mean, it's just like, too much. But the great moments in the novel are legendary. The story, like a vampire, will be immortal. So, overall, I enjoyed it, but I did not love it. Even knowing the story and plot points by heart just through osmosis, reading the book shades in the nuanced tones of the immortal portrait that is Dracula, and we're left to kind of marvel. Even while imperfect, Stoker created a more enduring classic than most classics. I mean, which classic do you know all the major plot points from by heart? Everybody knows the story of Dracula. Everyone. Even if they haven't read it. Better than food. 4 out of 5 coffees. It stood the test of time, but it's got some problems. Honestly, it was almost a 3.5 with that ending, I gotta admit. But that part with Renfield, it's great stuff. So who should read it? Everyone who enjoys horror and gothic literature. If you enjoy Joseph Sheridan Le Fanu, Edgar Allan Poe, and H.P. Lovecraft, check it out. In Dracula, the difference between reason and madness is the ability to think clearly, to observe, to deduce, to solve. That's what saves Van Helsing. Not steaks, not garlic, understanding. That's where the sponsor of today's show, Brilliant, comes in. It's a learning platform designed to sharpen those exact skills. Brilliant helps you improve your thinking skills through interactive hands-on problem solving in logic, math, and science, focusing on understanding concepts rather than just memorizing facts. With Brilliant, it's all about active learning. You don't just passively watch explanations. You dive in and engage with the material. And that makes it not only more effective, but a lot more interesting. Whether you're refreshing your basics or tackling advanced topics like data analysis or programming, Brilliant helps you build the daily learning habit that actually sticks. You can try Brilliant for free at brilliant.org/betterthanfood. Or go ahead and scan this QR code, and the link is also in the description. Because when you're up against the unknown, the best defense is a sharper mind. Brilliant is offering 20% off an annual subscription for viewers of this channel, which gives you unlimited daily access to everything on their platform. And thanks very much to Brilliant for sponsoring the show.
It is getting dark. I must take my leave. Always remember, Die reading.
Thanks for watching. Happy Halloween. Talk to you soon. Ciao.